Hello, hello, hello. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Tyler. How are you?
Oh man, I am doing fantastic today. It is a fantastic day.
Anytime you hear that song, it's a fantastic day.
That
True
is
story.
true. That is true. It's always the worst part of my day is having to hit stop so we can start talking. I just want to not do that.
Yeah, we should just have an hour of old Sawmill Creek. Um,
I
I'm
do have
sure.
my hour. It's just not during this time. I have my hour of podcast, and then I have my hour of Sawmill Creek solo, or two or three.
I like that. I need to do something like that when I'm in the shower or something.
Well, I have some I guess good news. It is good news. It's although it's not really the. I mean, I'll let you judge how important it is for you. But we did get some donations in, so yay! Congratulations.
All
You
right. We're
we are now
legit.
more successful as a podcast than my entire tenure as a backyard barbecue specialist. And if you do not know what that is, shame on you. Go back and listen from the beginning.
Yeah, episode 2 was it? I believe it wasn't it.
It was early on. I don't recall which one, but it was one of the early ones while we were still getting our fine craft put together.
Yeah, yeah. Believe it or not, we did not start out this sharp and precise, not as well oiled as the machine that you now know currently is.
Some opinions may differ.
Well, that's great. Yes. Thank you so much to our listeners who have. I just saw the what is that called at the bottom?
The banner,
The roll. Yeah, the banner at the bottom.
the rolling banner.
Very
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Anyway, before I saw that, I was just saying thank you to our donors. Very very thoughtful of you. Um, it's nice to have listeners. It's nice to have listeners who support us. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Very much appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, shall we jump into it? I know we have a lot to
Yeah,
talk about.
we do. We do have a lot to cover. This is a fun episode that I'm looking forward to going over with you. But first, we did have some questions from our last episode that came from you, Tyler, specifically. That I wasn't able to answer, so I've done some digging and found something that hopefully helps you sleep better at night. I know that you've been tossing and turning these last few days, wondering what the answers would be to those questions. So, the first question that you asked was, did Joseph threaten anyone with destruction if they were to see the plates? Is that right? Is that the
Yeah.
question you had?
Yes.
So this is something. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about this question, why you had it? Is it just
I mean, I don't know where I heard it from or if I even heard that. And I know that I've heard several different instances that can be found in Doctrine and Covenants and other very very reliable sources of Joseph Smith. Well, I say Joseph Smith as the historical perspective, as the person who would have said it. At times he's, or maybe always, he's speaking in the voice of God. But the reason that comes up is just is that often when there's something that that God really does not want somebody to do, such as look at the gold plates. Um, well, I don't know if gold plates is one of them. That's why I asked the question for this, but others, in Doctrine and Covenants specifically with polygamy, it comes up. Um, he threatens that if they do not comply, they will be destroyed, or either Joseph Smith or the person who doesn't comply will be destroyed. So that was kind of in the back of my mind when I ask the question. I don't know. I don't recall specifically if the plates had anything to do with it or not, though. So maybe you can share with us what you found.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I looked specifically at the gold plates to see if there were any instances of anyone being threatened. And there are a few sources, but none are very legitimate. Most of them come from antagonistic sources, characters. One says that Joseph was the whole gold plates thing was a joke. And as part of that joke, Joseph said, "Well, if you look at these plates, you'll be destroyed." That's kind of the tone I sort of interpreted with my own uh, biases and my own perspective. But essentially, this
Mhm.
man, this character said that he was in the room when Joseph entered, carrying a pillowcase, and I believe he came in to a room. His whole family was there, and he said, "I have the plates, but if you look at them, you'll be destroyed. Do you want me to show them to you?" And everyone said, "No, no, 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 no! Don't show us." For obvious reasons, they believed him and they didn't want to be destroyed. And then Joseph told this man that he was actually joking. There were no plates. He was just playing a practical joke. And there are some theories. There is a broader narration there that some uh, uh, scholars, I don't even know if they're scholars, but some people who have studied Mormon history have put out that Joseph was indeed just playing a joke, and the joke kind of got away from him, and so he just ran with it. So there's that.
Could
Another,
I ask a
oh,
question?
yeah,
You
go
you
ahead.
started off by saying that these are not very legitimate. Can you kind of explain what you say? When I think legitimacy, I think contemporary. Do they have an agenda that might create some bias? Was it firsthand? When you say it's not legitimate, why would you consider these sources not legitimate?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you do have to be careful. I have to be careful with saying claiming legitimacy on sources, whether they're legitimate or not. Uh, so this particular source, comes from someone who was antagonistic towards the Smiths, didn't think very much of them, and it was put into a publication that was meant to that served a specific agenda, had a specific objective to uh, destroy the Joseph Smith Mormon movement at the time. And so yeah, it's possible that this actually happened, that somebody saw this or experienced it. But when it's put into a tract in such a way where it's the obvious agenda of this tract is to bring down a movement, then that does kind of raise some red flags. There and like any rumor or story, secondhand story, a lot of the times it comes from a grain of truth, right? And so that's why it's hard to debunk. Um, Conspiracy theories work this way. You just find something that has just a speck of truth to it, and you can run with it, and that's why they're so hard to disprove. So
Okay,
again,
thank you.
yeah, it is hard to claim that it's not legitimate, but at the same time, as a, I think most historians would say, would be very careful with it. I'll put it that way.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. So another source comes from Charles Anthon, who we'll get into a little bit more later on. But Charles Anthon claimed that when Martin Harris brought the characters that were found on the gold plates to him to examine, he told Harris that he should have these plates officially examined, have like some sort of government authority go look at them. And Harris said he would be destroyed if he were to do that. Harris himself would be destroyed.
Was this Anthony's first or second telling of the
I
occurrence? It may not matter. It
that
doesn't matter.
I
From
believe it
what I
was the
understand, those are a
first.
little bit. what I understand, those are somewhat different accounts of what happened. But,
Yes, yeah. I believe it was the first.
okay.
And then there was another anti Mormon who said that Joseph said that no one could look upon the plates except his own firstborn son. Um, that one is a little bit fishy as well because Joseph had a pretty clear record of saying that someone, there would be three witnesses eventually, or the righteous would see the plates at some point, so that one's a little fishy as well. But on the flip side, you never had any of the Smiths, uh, never had Emma, Oliver Cowdery, none of the people who are close to Smith, who are in his inner circle. None of them. There's no there's no source of them claiming that they would be destroyed if they were to see the plates. No firsthand record of them saying that.
Gotcha. Cool. For
So,
for the dozen or so people who are crazy enough to see our faces, are you playing a two-face type role where you just want to show half of your face today?
oh,
Your camera,
sorry.
your camera is showing a great room, but we're missing half of you. Oh, there we go.
Is that better? Sorry, I was
I was
I don't
I
pay
don't know
attention
why
to
people
the
choose
camera.
to watch rather than listen, but I want to make sure they get the full experience for making the
Why?
for
No,
tuning in on YouTube.
I totally understand why someone would want to watch. I mean, look at us. We're both very, pleasing to the eye and attractive males who are of age. So why wouldn't you want to watch?
I wouldn't want to watch.
All right, moving on. The second question you had was, did Joseph take anyone else to see where the plates were buried? Do you want to give some context to that one, or was this just something you heard?
Yeah. So, well, actually, this one, since we talked, I looked it up again to figure out a little more about it. Um, and sure enough, I found something. Again, it was an antagonistic source, but it was the same two people we were talking about last week. So I found it very interesting that that if anybody would know about it, it would be the ones who are closely involved and the ones we'd be talking about. So it does make sense that those people would have something to say. I don't know if you want me to give away the ending, but that's what I found.
Yeah, sure. Take it away.
I'll have to change my name to Professor Jones.
Yeah.
So John,
I won't go that far, but yeah,
let me teach you a little bit of something about Willard Chase. How about that? Have you heard of him?
please. I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Was Yeah, someone brought him up in the last few episodes.
Okay.
Could be
So
wrong.
Willard Chase was I call him a somewhat long-time acquaintance of Joseph Smith in upstate New York, the Palmyra area, around 1810s, 1820s. And for whatever reason, they seem to kind of have a falling out. I don't know the history of what happened, but Willard Chase seems to have publicly come out against Joseph Smith and his what you call the Mormon movement. And so in this aftermath, he came up with as such, he also brought in a man named Samuel T. Lawrence to help um, to help kind of debunk Joseph Smith's claims. And Samuel T. Lawrence had some apparent um, gifts or abilities to um, see treasure and work in the magical realm. And so Willard Chase brought Samuel T. Lawrence and others from the area to kind of debunk Joseph Smith's, well, one of two things: either debunk Joseph Smith or find the gold plates and tape them and keep them for the treasure, the gold that they are. I'm not exactly sure what their motive was. I'm guessing at the beginning it was to get rich off the plates, and then as they did not get the plates, they kind of pivoted to kind of smear Joseph Smith's and his new church. Anyway, so let me tell you what Willard Chase said about an experience Samuel T. Lawrence had with Joseph Smith. Is this a quote out of Mormonism Unveiled, John?
It is,
You're,
yes.
this is I'm the professor, John. T8 pulls up
Well,
the
I
source.
don't know. Yeah, you tell me.
Yeah, John pulls up the sources. Thank you, assistant. So here's a quote out of Mormonism Unveiled. It says Joseph believed that one Samuel T. Lawrence was the man alluded to by the Spirit, and went with him to a singular looking hill in Manchester, and shewed him where the treasure was. Lawrence asked him if he had ever discovered anything with the plates of gold. He said no. He then asked him to look in his stone to see if there was anything with them. He looked and said there was nothing. He told him to look again and see if there was not a larger pair of specs with the plates. He looked and soon saw a pair of spectacles, the same with which Joseph says he translated the Book of Mormon. So this is the account, and I believe it's from what I saw, and I didn't spend much time looking, but maybe the only account, the only account I saw, what if I put it that way, is the only account I saw about this occurrence happening between Lawrence and Joseph Smith. But it is out there at least, and I think it's worth not discrediting, saying that it exists. It's from sources that I believe would be somewhat close to the situation. However, they are on more of the antagonistic side. So
Yeah, great. A little note about that. So Mormonism Unveiled, I think we should do an episode on it further down the line. But the reason why I think it's important is because not so much because of what it says about Mormonism and Joseph Smith, but because of what people thought about Joseph Smith and Mormonism. And so yeah, it's anti stuff and whatever, and you can take it however you want. But it is important to look into just because of that fact. It does show us what people were thinking and saying about Mormonism who are outside of the movement. So for that reason, historically, it's important.
awesome. Well, thanks for looking that up and sharing it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And to our listeners out there, please keep the questions coming. I don't. You can post them on our Instagram. I don't know. Are they able to post them on our website, Tyler? If they
Just
have
submit.
questions.
So our email address withthestonerolling@gmail.com is on our website. That's you can find that link on our website, but there's not a submit button on the website.
Okay. Yeah. Email's fine. We check that every so often. So yeah, please keep the questions coming. All right. So with today's episode, I thought it would be interesting to look into the context around the world that the Book of Mormon came into. And by that I mean the Book of Mormon claims to be a history of the Native Americans who came from Jerusalem, or at least a branch of uh, people living in Jerusalem who came to the New World. And so I thought it would be interesting to see what people in Joseph Smith's world were saying about Native Americans at the time and where Native Americans came from.
Can I ask? I was
Yes.
kind of expecting coming into this that we were going to talk about maybe translating the Book of Mormon, seeing as he just got them. Is this something that's before the translation, or are we going to skip the translation? What's your thought process as to going into this at this juncture?
Yeah. So it goes back to kind of what we were trying to do with this podcast, which is really hard to do, by the way. But what we were trying to do was take it not not in a narrative chronology, but in a source chronology, like go from the first sources that came to and telling the story that way. So that's one reason why we haven't looked into Lucy Mack Smith's narrative of Joseph Smith. We haven't looked at the first visions yet, all that sort of stuff. And it's because we wanted to originally focus on the sources as they come. And so the source for this one was actually the what is called the Anthon manuscript that Martin Harris took to Charles Anthon to examine after Joseph and Emma wrote down some of the characters that they found on the gold plates. So does that make sense?
Yeah, so this is the same Anthon that came up talking about being Martin Harris told him that Martin Harris, would be destroyed if he were to show Anthon the plates. The scholar, Egyptian scholar of Egyptian.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. He was. I think the term they would have used was a classicist,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
something that I would understand. He was a professor who knew ancient um, ancient writings
Correct.
more than most at least. But this was
Correct.
prior to them having the stone, the Rosetta Stone. And so in this area, nobody could read Egyptian yet. However, he was still an expert in the prior to reading Egyptian era.
Yeah.
Is that
So that
is that true?
almost, yeah. So the Rosetta
Okay.
Stone was discovered in the 1790s. So there was a lot of work going on to understand Egyptian hieroglyphics. But you're right in the fact that uh, it wasn't really a developed science in America yet. There was no Egyptologist as we know it now. There were definitely people who could not read, but see hieroglyphics and know that they were hieroglyphics. They would be recognizable, but there wasn't, information didn't spread as quickly as it does today. And so work on the Rosetta Stone was still ongoing. People were figuring it out, and it was being, what's the word? Sort of
Encrypted.
dispersed. Yeah, it was. Yeah, so translations were being dispersed around the world. But
Oh,
Anthon would not have been a guy who could just look at hieroglyphics and understand them. But he did know Latin, Greek, lots of other different classical, as they would call them at the time. Nowadays, classical literature refers mostly to Latin and Greek, but back then it would have related to all kinds of ancient languages.
okay. I'm interested. I never would have put Anthon together with Native Americans, so I'm interested to see where this goes.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's jump into it. In the summer of 1832, and I know I'm jumping ahead now, but Joseph Smith wrote in his personal history that the Lord appeared unto him, in a vision, and showed unto him his marvelous work which he was about to do. And he, Harris, immediately came to Susquehanna and said the Lord had shown him that he must go to New York City with some of the characters. So this is Joseph writing down that Martin Harris had a vision that the Lord wanted him to take some of the characters that were written on the gold plates to New York City to have them examined by an expert. Now, there's all kinds of theories as to why and how he found Charles Anthon. But it basically comes down to the fact that there weren't that many classicists around, not too many experts on classical languages. And Anthon worked at Columbia. And it's possible that Martin Harris got to New York and just started asking around. There's he supposedly talked to another expert whose last name was Mitchell, but we're not quite sure who that guy actually was. There's not a really strong record of that interaction, but and so it's possible that this Mitchell guy could have referred Harris to Charles Anthon. So backing up a little bit, Joseph and Emma wrote down or drew some of the characters that were on the gold plates, and I have a picture here. Am I able to?
You say Joseph and Emma. Did Emma help her write them? Did help him write the letters?
So that's a good question. The source says that, and it's from Emma. She said that she helped him write or draw the characters. So my guess is he probably described it to her, or maybe he wrote it down and she copied it. Because, as we know, Emma was not allowed to look at the plates. So yeah, it's interesting the language that she uses. Maybe she was just in the room, when he was drawing them. We don't know.
Okay.
But let's see. Let me do this here. Let me know if this works. Can you see that?
I'll have to share it first.
Okay.
Oh, don't want to see that.
Can
There we go.
you see that all right?
I think if they squint, they can see it.
Okay. So anyway, this is a purported copy of the Anthon manuscript. And I'll pull it off now. So those who are interested,
So can I just describe that? Can I describe that a little bit for? Well, I don't know
Yeah.
what to describe, but on the top it says characters, CARACTORS, and then there's just a bunch of, I don't want to call them squiggles. That sounds disrespectful to people who might be able to read this.
Yeah.
But it appears. I'll just have you look it up. I don't want to put too much into it. But
Yeah.
it's not what it's not what I would have recognized as Egyptian hieroglyphs if I'm looking at this. And as a non-expert, I wouldn't really know. But to me, I don't see very much consistency between just kind of the overall style of characters. But
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong about that, and you might go into this. So I would just
Yeah.
suggest look it up or decide for yourself, because I'm not an Egyptologist, but it does. It's worth looking at least if you've never seen these characters before. Can they find them on Google or something like that?
Oh
If they
yeah,
just
yeah,
Google,
and
if they Google
maybe
Anthon manuscript or something.
yep, yep, and
Okay.
we could maybe even post it to our Instagram or something. But
Oh, let's do it. Yes, I will.
yeah,
I'll take care of that.
okay. So there is I do need to explain though that this is just what's the word? This is a possibility of what it was. There's not this hasn't been confirmed that this was the actual manuscript and that these are the symbols, but this is just um, sort of what's the word? A traditional idea of what they looked like, but it hasn't really been confirmed. You know what I
Where did
mean?
this come from?
Great question. So this is a slip of paper that comes from David Whitmer, and Whitmer supposedly had the paper that Harris took to Anthon. Um, and so it comes from him, but again, we're not certain that it's legit. So the Anthon described the slip or the paper that he saw that there were vertical columns, and that there were that these vertical columns had strange marks. Um, he said at one point that it looked like uh, characters from the Mexican zodiac. I'm not really sure what that means. As if the Mexican zodiac is different from the European zodiac or the zodiac in general. But
So to be
it
clear with what I saw though, these are horizontal rows as opposed to vertical columns, at
I'm
least at the minimum, right?
yeah. That's what it looks like to me too. It looks like they're horizontal, but again, this is Anthon, and it could be this could be he wrote about this like 6 years after the fact, so it's possible he didn't remember it very well. Anyway,
Oh,
the point of all this,
Anthon said that they were vertical.
correct? Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
You're about to say the point of all this. Maybe we should get there.
The point of all this is to say that it's not confirmed that this is the actual slip of paper that Anthony saw.
Okay.
This is
It's
just
just a piece of
traditionally what it
paper.
is.
It's a piece of paper that was found, and the person who had it was known to be the person that has a copy of the manuscript.
Correct. Yeah.
And so they say this could be it because this was found in his possessions.
hmm Yeah.
Got
Yeah. And people have looked at it. Experts have looked at it, and of course, they say, "Well, yeah, it doesn't look like anything that I'd be able to translate, and that kind of goes along with the Mormon narrative, right? Which in the Book of Mormon, Mormon specifically states that nobody else knows this language. In fact, I think he kind of insinuates that the Nephites and the Lamanites themselves were losing that language. They were, the language that Nephi used. But anyway.
Okay. One other thing I will say, because I didn't know this,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what I'm learning right now looking at this, is that
Mm-hmm.
these characters aren't just a list of characters to show that these characters are what might be in the book. It appears that it's written down to say something. And the reason I say that is because some of them I'm noticing are repeated. And I wouldn't think that they would be repeated in this manner unless it was meant to kind of mean something as if it's written down in a story format or in a sentence format at least. So.
Yeah, good eye. I think you're right. So anyway, take that as you will, but that's kind of traditionally what the characters looked like.
Potentially.
So potentially, yep. So so Harris goes to Anthon in New York, and this was in February of 1828. Charles Anthon, as has already been explained, was an expert on classical languages. In fact, interesting tidbit about this guy is that Edgar Allan Poe once described him as the best classicist in America. So that was in,
And
I think, the
and
1850s.
and Edgar Allan Poe would know that.
Yes, we all know Edgar Allan Poe was big into classical uh, languages and literature, as well as
He's,
ravens and yeah, that sort of thing. Hearts that wouldn't
he,
stop beating.
he does have some memorable poems. I'll give him that.
Yeah. So again, Anthon, he did know classical languages. He would not have been able to translate Egyptian, but probably would have been able to recognize the characters. So then, of course, there's two sides to every story. The Harris account is what I would argue, most church members, LDS church members, are familiar with. He takes the manuscript to Anthon. Anthon looks at it, verifies that the characters are real and legit. He says that they are Egyptian, a mixture of Egyptian, Assyriac, and Chaldaic. And he signs a document saying that he verifies it, the characters are legitimate. And as Harris is leaving, Anthon asks him, where did the characters come from? Harris tells him that he tells him about Joseph and the golden plates. And Anthon then asked Harris if he could see the verification paper that he signed. Harris hands it back to him, and Anthon tears it up and says, "Bring me the plates, and I will translate them." And this, I think, is where what we talked about earlier. Harris says he can't bring them because they're sealed, and Anthon says, "I can't translate a sealed book."
I'm hearing a lot of documents that were torn up and we still have. He must have made copies of a lot of things before showing people his what Joseph Smith was writing.
Well, the thing he tore up was the verification letter that Anthon actually wrote.
The
He didn't.
verification level got torn up, not the
Right.
actual manuscript, not the actual characters. Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I should have
Good
specified that.
clarification.
Yeah. So that's the traditional Mormon narrative. From Anthon's side, as you pointed out earlier, he wrote down what happened on two separate occasions, years apart from each other. One was in 1834 in the tract Mormonism Unveiled, and the other was in 1841. And just the two distinctions that I would make between the two of them is that in 1834, he denies everything that Harris says. He said he looked at the characters, immediately knew that they were not legitimate, and he actually tried to warn Harris that he was being duped, and he didn't actually give an opinion on the characters. Then in the 1841 document, or his 1841 account, he said that he did write something, but it was to expose Joseph for the fraud that he was. In both instances, he claims that he tried to protect Harris from Joseph's dubious claims, from what he considered were Joseph's dubious claims. But the interesting thing about it is that Harris left New York City more convinced than ever that what Joseph was doing was divine and inspired. It convinced him so much to the point that he helped Joseph translate the plates and mortgaged a portion of his farm to pay for the Book of Mormon publication. So whatever happened, Harris came away convinced. So, any questions on that?
What does this have to do with Native Americans?
Great point. So this, I think it brings up the question that, okay, so we have these characters written on the supposed ancient record that claims to be a record of Native Americans, right? So what were people saying about Native Americans at the time? Did they believe that was the Book of Mormon narrative common? Were people wondering, or did they believe that Native Americans had come from Jerusalem or the old world in some capacity? Were they from biblical times? Were they a lost tribe? That sort of thing. So I think that's sort of my train of thought here, is just from these characters, these ancient characters on an ancient record that talks about the origins of an ancient people, and comparing it to what contemporary people were saying. Does that make sense?
So the question then is, these characters are from the earliest Native Americans, according to Joseph Smith. And so is that where you're linking them? Is if these are the writings of Native Americans, then let's find out if there was other. Well, not only were these characters from Native Americans, these characters are from Native Americans that came from Jerusalem. And so you're trying to now describe, is this the first time someone came up with that idea of people coming from Jerusalem to America, or is that an existing concept that was thrown around in this area? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So like if imagine you're Charles Anthon, a farmer, a very kind, well-meaning farmer, comes to you and says, "Hey, I found these characters," or I didn't find them. Someone gave me these characters that are written on an ancient record of Native Americans. What do you think? Like, what was what was going through Anthon's head at the time? Like, what was his view of the origins of Native Americans? And this goes for everyone at that time, right? Like anyone who heard about the story of the gold plates, what was their thought of the origins of Native Americans? Would they have thought that this was plausible? Was this a new theory to them? That's what I want to get at in this episode.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Okay. So we're going to focus on mostly the New York area because that's where this was all taking place. There were a lot of different thoughts on where Native Americans came from, but surprisingly, it wasn't really on the top of people's minds. No, there weren't a ton of writings on where Native Americans came from, especially in the New York area in the 1820s, mostly because Native Americans had basically been kicked out of the state. There were pockets of them here and there. They were certainly around, but they had been basically removed. There wasn't a large presence. So Joseph Smith's family, they would not have been fascinated with the origins of Native Americans, which is kind of telling. They were more fascinated with old Spanish gold than they were, or old Spanish explorers than they were with Native Americans. Read into that what you will, but I think it's kind of interesting. So there was a book that came out around the time that Andrew Jackson was president. Andrew Jackson, of course, made a name for himself by fighting Indians, and so because of his popularity, not lots, but a famous book came out that talked about Native Americans, gave some context to these wars that Americans had been fighting with Native Americans at the time. And in that book, it claims that, well, it hypothesizes that Native Americans came from the Old World. The wordage or the verbiage they use are like a wayward Carthaginian vessel, Malayans, Laplanders, the Kamchatkins, from the Eastern Russia, Scythians, Israelites, Tungusi in Northern Asia, Egyptians. The author, his name was Sanders. I can't remember his first name, but he was more towards the idea that Native Americans came across Asia from the Bering Strait, either when the continents were joined or perhaps by boat. Then this is kind of interesting too. There's an 1823 article that was published in Palmyra that speculated that the first settlers of North America were probably Asiatics and descendants of Shem. So there's another one for you. They thought that Asiatics came from they crossed over at an early period, probably through the Pacific Ocean.
So a lot of this went over my head, but to simplify, are you saying that most of the mainstream perception is that the Native Americans came from Asia?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Mm-hmm. But not, they're not sure where exactly they were from. Not sure exactly how they got there. But yeah, I think the prevailing theory at the time was probably largely what it is now, that they came from Asia and crossed the Bering Strait.
Okay.
But having said that, there was a theory out there that people did adhere to, which was that Native Americans were a lost tribe of Israel. And if we go back to the Old Testament, there's the two kingdoms: the northern kingdom of the 10 tribes, and then the southern kingdom of the tribe of Judah. And the Assyrians invade in the 8th century BC, and from then the 10 tribes are dispersed and they disappear.
Okay, help me a little bit with my ancient church history here. Saying that they're from the lost tribes, that you mentioned earlier that Shem is the son of Noah, like Noah's Ark.
Right.
Shem,
right.
So he would not be included in the 10 tribes.
Correct.
So when you're saying they're from the lost tribes carried away from Assyrians, you're saying that they're not from the seed of Shem, Noah's son, rather from whatever line is more the European Jerusalem line.
Right. So, yeah. So they're two different theories on the origins, right? So there's the one theory that says, oh yeah, they're from Shem, Noah's son. But then this theory was that they were from the 10 tribes. And this theory, the 10 tribes theory, was popular among religious thinkers. Now, this is where a really interesting document comes into play, and it's called The View of the Hebrews, and it was written by a Congregationalist minister named Anthon Smith. Now, if I could just take a moment here. Last few episodes, we've been talking about Joseph Knight, and we've been getting all kinds of confused about which Joseph we're talking about. Now we're talking about Anthon Smith, and I'm sure we're going to get all kinds of confused on which Smith we're talking about. There's just not a lot of variety in names back in the day, and it's kind of frustrating in a lot of ways. But anyway, I digress.
Okay, John. John's not a confusing name either, so we'll just run with that.
Hey, man, I know when people are talking about me. That's not my problem. Anyways, yeah, so Anthon Smith is a Congregationalist minister. He was doing his work around a town called Pulteney, I think is what I'm pronouncing. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Pulteney, Vermont. And the interesting thing, and we'll circle back to this, is that Oliver Cowdery was born in Wells, Vermont, which is right by there. But anyway, this document, this book, View of the Hebrews, was written as sort of a history of the Israelites, and by that I mean not just Jews, but the entire 12 tribes of Israel. And the first section is just it's basically just a history of Jerusalem and its fall, how it was destroyed by the Romans, that sort of thing. But then later on, it gets into a hypothesis that the Native Americans are part of the 10 tribes. And in the 1840s, Mormons actually attached themselves to this document to show that, to sort of back up Book of Mormon claims. You know, oh, here's a document from someone who's not Mormon that's claiming that the Native Americans are members of the lost tribes of Israel. And it gets kind of interesting after that. It kind of, goes by the wayside for a long time. But then in 1903, a guy named I. Woodbridge Riley, who I think was a PhD student at Yale, wrote a dissertation on Joseph Smith. And he speculated that Joseph Smith got some of his ideas from this document.
So, sorry, you mentioned that Oliver Cowdery was born next to Pulteney, Vermont. Was he? Would he have been in the congregation of Ethan Smith? Do we know if there was any interaction there that Oliver Cowdery may be familiar with the View of the Hebrews, or is that all left to speculation?
Yeah, so a lot of people have theorized that yes, he did know. In fact, Oliver Cowdery did work in a printing press at one point, and so some have connected the dots there that okay, Ethan Smith had this thing published in a printing press in Pulteney. Oliver Cowdery was probably working there at the time, so that's how he may have been exposed to this book. And then Oliver obviously comes to Harmony and helps Joseph with the translation. So there are some people who have connected the dots to say, hey, look, Oliver Cowdery knew about this. Then he went to Joseph, and Joseph wrote a book about, the origins of Native Americans. So yeah, there have been people who have made that claim.
Okay, but it's not founded by any documentation. It's just connecting probability. I mean,
right.
What we do know is he's from that area, the same area as Ethan Smith, and we know he worked at a printing press, but we don't know any more than that to say definitively he brought this book with him or he told Joseph Smith about it. We don't know any of that. We just know that there's a potential for that type of exposure.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no record of Oliver Cowdery saying, "Oh yeah, I know that book, and I knew it before I met Joseph." There's nothing like that. So,
and you mentioned that a view of the Hebrews is a view of the Hebrews. Got that right? Is talking about Native Americans coming from the 10 tribes. Is that the only similarity, or are there other parallels between the two books?
Yeah, great question. So, that's sort of what people have been doing since 1903 is looking for parallels between this book, A View of the Hebrews, and the Book of Mormon. The biggest similarity, of course, is that Native Americans come from the 10 tribes of Israel. The big difference, however, is that A View of the Hebrews is more of an anthropological study of Native Americans. Ethan Smith pulls from lots of different sources. People have gone and done work before him. Lots of, we would call them anthropologists, people who spent time with Native Americans and wrote down their research. Whereas the Book of Mormon is a narrative right? It's not an anthropological study. But in the 1920s, um, there was a church, an LDS church general authority, a member of the 70, named B.H. Roberts. And B.H. Roberts, I'm not sure how or why, but he somehow became exposed to this book and claims and the claims that Joseph Smith took from it. So he set out to do an examination, put together some information, and give it to church leaders, meaning the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and the First Presidency. And what he comes up with are 18 similarities. And don't ask me what they are because I haven't read it. I'm sorry, I didn't do the historiography on this. We could get into it later on, because it is an important document that would influence Mormon history through the 20th century. But he comes up with 18 similarities. And a lot of people or a lot of historians kind of grabbed onto that and either agreed with it or disagreed with it or said there's more similarities, there's less similarities between the two. But that's sort of when I think, in my opinion, the B.H. Roberts doing his examination, that's when the interest in the two books kind of takes off. And then the next landmark event in this is when Fawn Brody uses it in her book called No Man Knows My History, her biography of Joseph Smith, which was, ruffled all kinds of feathers. Depending on what camp you're in, it was either really great or really bad. But her book was sort of a seminal biography of Joseph Smith. And she claims in her book that Joseph Smith was inspired by A View of the Hebrews. He took a lot of ideas from it and then used his imagination to write the rest of the Book of Mormon. And then it's been used, in a lot of different ways since then by both faithful Mormon scholars to anti-Mormon scholars. So that's sort of the history of it. But to get into what it says, what's actually in there, as I said, there's a big section on the history of Jerusalem during the time of Jesus and how it was destroyed. A lot of what he focuses on are scriptures from the Old and New Testament that claim that the 10 tribes would return. Ethan Smith seemed to be really enamored with this idea of the return of the 10 tribes. And he sort of opens up the section with a quote. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it? I've been talking a lot.
Okay. Sure, let me give you. I'll go ahead. So this is from View of the Hebrews. Is that what this quote's from? Okay.
Yep.
So this is out of View of the Hebrews. Mm-hmm. What are we to believe concerning the 10 tribes? Are they ever again to be restored and known as the natural seed of Abraham? Are they now in existence as a distinct people? If so, where are they to be found? All parts of the world are now so well known that one would conceive the Commonwealth of Israel could not be found among the civilized nations. Must we look for them in a savage state? If so, the knowledge of their descent must be derived from a variety of broken, circumstantial, traditionary evidence. Who or where then are the people who furnish the greatest degree of this kind of, who or where then are the people who furnish the greatest degree of this kind of evidence? I butchered the end. My apologies.
That's all right. We'll let it slide. But so not Oliver Cowdery, sorry, Ethan Smith is saying, okay, we have these what he called civilized. Now we're using 19th century language here. We have the civilized nations. There's no way the 10 tribes are among them. That just doesn't make sense. But so maybe perhaps they're among indigenous nations. He of course uses the word savage, which we not super friendly,
I,
not a super
I think
friendly term, but
I think it's fair to say that people were pretty racist back then.
yeah,
I think that's a fair term, and I
yeah,
don't think we need to hide it. But I don't think that I think savage is very much a derogatory racist term
right.
that's used and with that intent.
Yeah, yeah. So that's obviously what he's thinking. Like people, we have to look at people who we cannot trace their history, who are not, uh, as developed because they're more mysterious. There's not as much known about them. And so what he does then is he goes on for pages, listing all of these behaviors that Native Americans do, but also the Jewish people do, and he does it in a question format. He says, "Where could we find a people that circumcise their young, for example? Where could we find a people that worship one God? Where could we find a people that offer sacrifices?" And he just goes on and on and on. And then finally, he gets to a point. He even references the stick of Judah and the stick of Ephraim, which longtime church members will recognize. Of the stick of Judah is the Bible, the stick of Ephraim is the Book of Mormon coming together, to testify of Christ. But he eventually comes to a part where he says, "But you inquire, where or who are the people thus described?" And again, this is after he's gone on for pages describing these people. "They are the Aborigines of our own continent. Their place, their language, their traditions amount to all that has been hinted. These evidences are not all found among any one tribe of Indians, nor may all the Indians in any tribe where various of these evidences are found be able to exhibit them." So there's his claim, right, that the 10 tribes are among the Native Americans. And then he goes on to quote different anthropologists and things who believe the same thing.
Would it be reasonable to think that because the Book of Mormon gets pretty into them losing their, dare I call it, civility due to
Mhm.
sin, they lost their ability to be to grow great civilizations and all that tied into being savages. Um, was there that indication in this book as well that these people had fallen away from God and that's why they became uncivilized, or is that not found in the view of the Hebrews?
That's a really good question. And I'm not entirely sure. I know that he says at one point that there was intermingling of the 10 tribes and other native people, not necessarily in North America, but on their journey to North America. And I think he's implying there, if I remember right, he's implying that that's where the quote savagery comes from, right? That again, that's a derogatory term, but that's how the wordage he would have used. So, but that's a good question. I may have to look into that a little bit more, if that's a parallel between a view of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon.
Cool. Well, John, this is great. I have some bad news. I found something online that might replace us.
What?
Yeah, it's that AI chat GPT.
Oh yeah, that dang AI chat
I, I can
GPT.
now
Yeah.
go to that and ask it any question, and I no longer need to come to you for this. So I'm going to go to find out the parallels between these two books, and I no longer need your services. But this is great
Perfect.
too. But if I just want to waste an hour listening, this is my first stop.
Waste an hour. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. This has actually been interesting. I appreciate you. Was there more you wanted to cover in this, or does this cover all of it?
Well, um, I think we've covered the important parts, but yeah, there are this. I think a view of the Hebrews is important because it talks about what Americans thought about the origins of Native Americans at that time. And it gives us an example, or it gives us an idea of how acceptable the Book of Mormon would have been in terms of offering a narrative of where Native Americans came from. And because there's publications like this out there at the time, I do think that it would have been easily acceptable, or at least easily understandable, if not acceptable, to people who receive the Book of Mormon.
And this would be within at least religious circles. Maybe not everybody, but within religious circles, it would be, they may have come across this type of I don't know what the term is, or origin story for the Native Americans within their own religious journeys.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It would have been easier for for Christians to accept the narrative of the Book of Mormon because they had most likely, or at least they were open to the idea of Native Americans being among the lost 10 tribes of Israel.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of a introduction to what we might be talking about next week?
Yes. So sorry to keep putting it off, but we'll finally get to the translation process, what it looked like. I've put together a couple of different sources of people who were either there or heard secondhand what the translation process looked like, how it went down, and what was involved.
Awesome. I look forward to it. All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you. We will. Do we have any? 5-star review?
Yeah. Please leave your 5-star reviews.
Which one should we ask for? Let's ask for one this week. Do one thing for us this week, and that is subscribe on YouTube. Can I throw that out there? Whether you're a podcast listener or a YouTube listener, please subscribe on YouTube. Log in, hit that subscribe button. We won't bug you with junk emails or anything like that. I don't know how it works. If you do get bugged, let me know. I'll stop asking people. But really, what it really is, it's just a way for us to recognize listeners and followers. So this week, log on to YouTube, subscribe. I am certain we have more listeners than we have subscribers, so that would be very helpful for us to kind of keep tabs a little bit.
We need to balance things out. Yeah.
I did see our review status is 4.8 stars, so that's pretty good. People who listen at least like it. No, I don't know if it's just Apple or if it's all podcasts.
We'll say all podcasts.
Yeah, so 4.8 is pretty good. Whoever didn't put that 5-star, keep listening. We'll pull you up to a 5 with time.
Yeah, wait a minute. Someone didn't put 5? Who has
don't think too much into it.
Was it you, Tyler? It was you, wasn't it? You gave us a 4-star review.
If you had shown your face the whole time, I certainly would give a higher rating. But
yeah, I bet it was you. Maybe it was my mom.
I won't get into that.
Yeah,
Mr. Floyd can have his own theories on what's going on there. But, all right. Well, thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Subscribe
Tyler.
on YouTube. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.